Trigger warning. This podcast is about grief. Whether you are newly bereaved or whether you have been stuck in grief for years, I do hope this podcast brings you some comfort. Grief is such a universal experience, but we all do it differently. This podcast is not about fixing you or forcing the healing process, because there is no cure for grief. It can only be absorbed, experienced, loved and cared for. So whether you are doing it privately behind closed doors, or like me, you are kicking and screaming your way through, let's support each other. This is a safe space where we can come together and share experiences. My hope is that this podcast shines a light on your path and gives you the strength to navigate your way through the grieving process. My name is Louise Bates, and I'm so pleased we connected. I'm looking forward to interviewing people who have also walked this path to find out what worked for them, in the hope that it helps you too. I'm sending you so much love and support, and I look forward to sharing this crazy journey with you. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Gift for Grief, and today I'm delighted to be speaking to Sharon Luca. Sharon is an author, public speaker and podcaster. Sharon's life was turned upside down in 2012 when she lost her precious son Luca to stillbirth at 36 weeks. Sharon has a sad story, but since then she has gone on to give the gift of time to thousands of grieving families through her award-winning Luca Foundation. Sharon is driven by her vision to fund enough cuddle cots to serve every maternity unit throughout the UK, so no one else has to go through what she went through. So welcome, Sharon, and thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we start, could you just explain exactly what is a stillbirth?
So a stillbirth is basically when your child passes away within your womb and you still have to give birth to them, and they are born still. So they're born sleeping.
Yeah. I've often heard people refer to the stillbirth as a baby is born sleeping. Is this a term that the stillbirth community like to use?
Yes, it is. I think it's more sensitive, I suppose, to say that they were born sleeping.
Yeah. So according to the NHS website, 1 in every 200 pregnancies ends in a stillbirth in the UK. So that's 8 babies every day. Now, I find these statistics heartbreaking, but it's not something you hear a lot about, is it?
No, it's actually 15 babies on average die every day.
Oh, wow.
So that can be either through stillbirth or within the first 28 days of their life.
Okay.
So on average, it is roughly around 15 per day, which is a staggering amount, obviously.
It is. It's unbelievable in this day and age, isn't it?
Yes.
Those figures are so high.
Indeed.
Now, I know your story, Sharon, but would you like to share in your own words a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how life has taken you down this very different path?
Yes. So before Luca passed away, and just for the record, we added Luca to our surname to keep his name alive, as I had promised him. So we're Luca-Chatha, but I'm mostly known as Sharon Luca, and I do like that because it's obviously my son's name, and that's what I'm keeping alive, as I promised him. And so that's unusual, and people do really like that. So, you know, or sometimes they get a bit confused and I say, was he called Luca? I was like, no. So, but yeah, I mean, before Luca passed away, we my husband and I, we met back in 2008, and we married a couple of years later. We both had successful careers. I was a project manager, and we were just doing the normal thing. We married in our 30s. We saved up to have a baby. He was very much planned, and then we had this sudden awful turn. So it was the first day of my maternity leave, and he'd kicked extremely hard over the weekend and that very morning as well. I had workmen putting in blackout blinds in the nursery, very much in the nesting mode. And then come the evening, he just stopped moving. And he was always very active in the evening. So it was always morning and evening. He was always kind of quiet during the day. And so it seemed bizarre that he wasn't. And and then, my husband said, baby's really quiet this evening. I was like, yeah, can't understand why. Had a cold drink, see if we can get him moving. That didn't work. Had a piece of chocolate. Again, that didn't work. Went to lay down on my left side to get him moving as well. And that didn't work either. And I thought, could he be running out of space to move? You just think at these late stages, because they do say babies can find it hard to move around at these late stages. But nonetheless, we called the hospital and said, what's happening, what we've tried, and they said, come in, we'll just check everything's okay. And that's when we were told his heart had stopped.
Oh my goodness me! I mean, I don't suppose for a minute you saw that coming.
No.
You just thought they would reassure you that everything's okay, and
Yeah.
how do you process that news?
I can actually still hear my scream today when they told me I'm sorry. And it takes me back to that moment where my husband just fell to his knees and cradled me, and we just sobbed.
Yeah.
And the doctor and the two midwives walked out the room to leave us alone. And then because it was night, it was nearly midnight by this point, we just went into shutdown mode, into disbelief that this was even happening. And when the doctor came back and I said, why has this happened? And he says, I don't know, I can't give you any answers right now. And because it was nearly midnight, they said, you need to come back in the morning to get rescanned, because it has to be 2 doctors that do it.
So you went home after that?
They sent us home, said come back the next morning. And obviously we didn't sleep, the next morning we drifted in and out and sleep, but woke up thinking, have I just had a nightmare?
Yeah.
Is this really true? And I looked at my husband, I was like, is this true? And he says, yeah, you're not dreaming. And I just broke down into tears again. And that was really the few days that we had were back and forth to the hospital. So we went back that morning, we had to get rescanned. I was, hoping that they'd got it wrong.
Yeah.
And saying that actually, no, he's fine. And to be then obviously told again that no, he's definitely gone. And then having to wait around to see an obstetrician to give me the details of what would happen next, and a midwife, and then they gave me some tablets to induce me. And they said, right, take these tablets now, and then go home, come back again the next day.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, it was back and forth a lot, but obviously we had to go home and break the news to family as well.
Yeah.
That morning before going to the hospital, I did say to my husband, I says, tell my brother Stephen, because I was very close to my brother Stephen, and still am, and he lived in London at the time, and I says, I need him here. And I said, tell my mum, because she knew I was going to be having a checkup that day anyway. So I said, tell my mum, because otherwise they were self-employed with the post office, etc. I says, otherwise she's going to end up opening the post office, and she won't want to once she knows this. So my husband just made 3 phone calls to his manager at work, my mum and my brother. And then we went to the hospital. Obviously got those tablets, came back home, and then everyone started to come over to see us. So my mum and dad, they obviously closed their business for that day. My sister came. She didn't go to work. She came with my parents. Stephen made arrangements to to get to Coventry train station. And yeah, so everyone just did everything that they could to come get to me as soon as possible.
So you had a good support network around you, a personal support network. Did you find the hospital staff dealt with your experience in a compassionate and respectful way?
Not really, no.
Okay.
We had an issue, it was with the receptionist that morning we had to go back. So this was Monday evening when we found out he'd passed away.
Yeah.
Tuesday morning we went back and the receptionist was like, "Oh no, you're not down to be in here today." I said, "No, we are, because we came in last night and the doctor told us to come this morning. So they are expecting us." "Oh no, I can't see it." She was just not helpful at all in the situation, just left us sitting around. And eventually when we did get seen, bizarrely, we got seen, and the doctor later on, when I was in labour with Luca, it was him that said, "Oh, you didn't come that morning," when I said, and I says, "No, we did. It was the receptionist that wouldn't let us see you."
That's unbelievable, Sharon.
Yeah. And he said, "Oh, do you mind me asking which reception it was?" And we had to describe her. And he says, "Ah, right." And he says, there obviously had issues with this receptionist in the past, and now she'd done it at such a sensitive time.
Yeah.
So obviously something would have happened along the lines there, but
but at a time when you're going through your darkest period, luckily you've got a good network of people around you personally, but then you think that the hospital would be geared up for this situation, and they'd be expecting you, and you'd be welcomed and supported, and you wouldn't expect that sort of treatment, would you?
No.
But the tablets induced you, so you had to go through the labour.
yes.
So how long was that for?
So Tuesday evening, by that point we'd seen, I think, everybody apart from my father-in-law, who came the following morning. So the Wednesday morning we had to go back to the hospital, so we needed to be there, I think, for about 10 o'clock. And that was just waiting for my waters to break, really, and have some more tablets to induce me.
Yeah.
And he came Wednesday morning before we went to the hospital. And then once we were there, we were put in a private room and just had to wait the course, really, for the medication to work and my waters to break.
Were you put in the labour suites? Could you hear, because I've often heard other people who have gone through a similar experience, where they can hear babies being born?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And
is this still happening today?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, many hospitals don't have the room to shut off to a private section for mums to give birth to their sleeping babies, and it's devastating, really, that this is not prioritised, and for mental health reasons and the ongoing mental health issues that occur from losing your child.
Yeah. So when Luca was born, were you able to hold him and be with him?
No. So what happened was, so I went into labour on the Wednesday evening, early evening, about 6 o'clock. But I was in so much pain I needed an epidural. So they sent in a junior anaesthetist to do the epidural, but it took him 6 attempts and he couldn't get it in. So I was in excruciating pain, screaming, because it was extremely painful every time he tried to get the epidural in. And then they finally called the senior anaesthetist, and she managed to get it in straight away. And afterwards I just thought, why are they not prepared and have the senior there ready for me straight away, knowing what I'm going through already? And then obviously everything calmed down and I just I wasn't going to then feel the contractions. So they had to keep an eye on my contractions throughout the night. So I was
Yeah.
in labour throughout overnight. And I gave birth to him just around 8 o'clock the next morning, which was then Thursday morning. So we'd gone from Monday night finding out he'd passed away to Thursday morning before I actually gave birth to him.
Is that normal in this situation?
Yeah, unfortunately.
So you probably had no sleep,
No.
and then you then have to go through the full labour.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine what you had to go through, Sharon. It's unbelievable to me that, this happened, and in a hospital in this country with all the expertise and amazing NHS, do you think your experience was a one-off, or is this sort of still happening today where the treatment could be better?
Yes, I think the treatment still could be better. I think they've got better in certain ways, in terms of giving more dedicated care to those parents during that time. But once I had given birth to Luca, for some reason, and to this day I still don't know, they took him to a different room to clean him and dress him. So I'd given the clothes that I'd bought for him to be dressed in. And yes, I mean, if it's a living baby, they're still in the same room when they get dressed, etc.
Yeah.
But I couldn't understand then why they took Luca to a different room. But then as they did that, my placenta wasn't detaching, so I had to go to theatre for another surgery to detach my placenta. In the meantime, I'd said to my husband, make sure you have time with Luca while I'm in the theatre. And they hadn't brought Luca back, so I'd come back from theatre after, I don't know, an hour or so, I don't even know the times. And I looked at my husband and couldn't see a cot anywhere. And I was like, where's Luca? And he says, I don't know. I says, what do you mean you don't know? He says, I don't know where he is. And
this is how many hours after you'd given birth?
Probably a good 2.5 hours.
Okay.
And he says, I asked at the front desk where he is, and she said to me, are you the father of the dead baby?
Okay.
And he was in bits, and I said, so where is he? And he says, I don't know. And I says, do you mean they've lost him? He says, I don't know. And so nobody knew where Luca was. And I'd come back from surgery expecting to be holding my baby. And midwives come in and out, and I was like, where's our son? Where is he? And each one would say, I'll find out and come back. They left, but they never came back. So we were constantly asking, where is he? Where is he? 9 hours later.
9 hours later, you still hadn't...
Yeah.
I can't believe this. I knew your basic information. I didn't know all of these details. It's really unbelievable, Sharon. Did you find out what had happened, where he was?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, we so our bereavement midwife came on duty, and she came in to see Luca and see us, and she said, "Oh, where is he?" We said, "We don't know." And we were in bits. And we said they've lost him, and she said, "What?" I said, "I gave birth to him at 8 o'clock this morning, and we've not seen him since. No one's telling us where he is. They've lost him." She stormed out the room, and she came back about 10 minutes later and said, "I found him. He's next door." So he was just in the next room, and yet nobody could tell us that he was in the next room.
So what was this room?
Just another labour room. Just another room where anybody could have given birth to their child in.
So was he in one of these cuddle cots?
No, we didn't have a cuddle cot, unfortunately. They didn't have any at that time. So we lost those 9 hours. The paediatricians were with him by the time Sam, my bereavement midwife, found him. And she says, "I'm going to go back. I'm not going to let him out my sight." and as soon as they're finished, I'll wrap him up and bring him to you. And she did. She did that. In the meantime, she took his handprints and footprints for us to have in his memory box. And as soon as they'd finished measuring him, etc., she brought him to us herself. And like I said, this was 9 hours later, so we were robbed of 9 hours with our son, and not having a cuddle cot either. It was just the most traumatic thing to happen already in traumatic circumstances.
Yeah. So the support you got before and during labour wasn't great.
No.
And then after the birth, you had to have surgery, and then to wake up from surgery, and then to have this further torture of not knowing where your son is. Do you hold any resentment or negative thoughts towards your experience or about your care, Sharon? Or have you been able to make peace with this?
No, I haven't. I think all these years later, it still angers me that we were stolen off that time with Luca.
Yeah.
Because although we had him overnight with us in a bereavement room, which was, again, upstairs on the maternity ward, but to one side, so you couldn't hear any babies crying or anything. It was actually a bereavement. It looked a bit like a hotel room, with a television, a sofa, etc., and a normal double bed rather than a hospital bed. And they'd placed him in a Moses basket for us to have him, but it wasn't a cuddle cot, so his body wasn't being kept cool, so he was deteriorating over that time.
Okay.
And so they made it clear that, we've got him tonight, and then they didn't say how long we'd have him the next day. We just, our families came to see him, his grandparents, my grandmother, his only remaining great-grandparent, and our siblings came to see him in that family room, and then we went to sleep. But the motherly instincts had already sort of crept in, and I was waking up during the night to check on him, not really connecting that actually what am I checking on? He's not going to move. It wasn't really. It felt really, really bizarre. But then the next morning when we did wake up, we were told we didn't have very long with him, and that, make the most of holding him. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, you'd lost him for 9 hours yesterday. We've just had this overnight period, and now you're telling me we've only got an hour or so with him again before he's got to go. And I just couldn't take it. I just couldn't handle it. I started walking around with him in my arms, and I was rocking him because those motherly instincts were there. And we took it in terms to hold him, but we weren't having enough time. It wasn't enough satisfying time of holding him, which if we'd had a cuddle cot, we would have had those extra days, and we could have really properly held him and taken in every feature of him. We could have changed him. We could have, washed him. We could have, done lots of different things. And at this point, because we were just thinking about holding him the most, we didn't even take pictures of him in our arms. And that's something I regret now as well. And that's because of all this lost time. It didn't sink in really all the things we should be doing, because we were just making the most of the little time that we had.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you had had a cuddle cot, how would your experience have been different?
So we would have had him for days with us, as opposed to just those hours. So we could have took him home with us if we wanted to, or we could have stayed in that family room with the cuddle cot.
So how does the cuddle cot work?
So it pumps cold water into mattresses that are then lined with foil, so it keeps the baby's body cold.
I see.
So it's when they're cold, they don't deteriorate so quickly. So it's preserving them, basically,
Yeah.
which means that the families get more and more time to say their goodbyes and make memories.
Yeah. Do you know, I had a lovely guest, Rachel, on a few weeks ago. In fact, it was episode 8. Now, Rachel also experienced a stillbirth with her daughter, Narayan. But she was able to visit Narayan for a few days after the stillbirth, and she talked about how the nurses put her daughter into a little cot and she could read to her and be with her, and she was able to create memories with her daughter. So I presume Narayan would have been placed in a cuddle cot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it would make a big difference to the grieving process as well, I think, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
So, obviously, this is massive. I don't know how you pick yourself up from this experience, Sharon. What moved you to forming the Luca Foundation and creating these, what you're doing now, making sure every maternity unit in the UK has a cuddle cot? How did you get from losing Luca to where you are now?
Well, oh gosh, that's a story. So we had to sign the papers to have a post-mortem done for Luca, because we needed to know why he'd passed away in that way. And so we'd signed those forms, etc. And then he was taken off. But we had the midwife come back a few times to take him, and I kept saying no. And I just wanted to hold on to him. I just was not ready for him to go. And then eventually I was pretty much forced to let him go. And when she carried him out, I placed him in his Moses basket, and I kissed him. And I promised him he'll never be forgotten. And I needed to do that bit. I couldn't let the midwife take him and put him in the cot. I needed to do that bit. And then when she took him, I just yelled out, "No, I need him back." And that still lives with me today.
Yeah.
Just not having that time, not having him in my arms long enough, not being able to accept what had happened.
Yeah.
In those few hours, it was all so quickly. Everything was happening so quick.
Yeah.
Out of our control, really. And it left me in such a dark, dark place that after his funeral, I almost took my own life because I was so empty and so heavy in grief, in such a dark place. The world had no colour. It was just waking up and going to sleep in this horrid internal pain of heartbreak that I wanted to end. I didn't want to feel like that anymore. I just wanted to be with my son.
Yeah. And what pulled you out from that?
As I was about to take my life, I noticed the time. Something made me look at the clock. I don't know why. God made me look at the clock, and it was then I realised my husband was coming back from work soon.
Okay.
And instead of thinking I better hurry up and do this, I realised he was going to find my body.
Yeah.
And suddenly I couldn't do it to him. I broke down. I thought, I can't do that to him. And so I was in bits when he came back from work. And earlier, not that long after, and he said, "What's the matter? What's changed today that you're like this?" And I told him, and then he broke down and said, "Promise me you're not going to do that," because he says, "I can't live then without you as well." And he then worked from home for a few days to keep an eye on me.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
Sharon, you've got me going here. It sounds like you've got a wonderful man and you had each other.
Yeah.
But how did you get from that place to where you are now?
So we found out that through Luca's post-mortem results that it was actually medical negligence that led to him passing away. So at 24 weeks I'd had a growth scan, and the lady scanning me had known the person living in our house before we bought it. She kept talking about him and different things, and the different neighbours on the close, and scanning him. She gave us extra pictures, all of that, and she says, "Oh yeah, everything's fine," but missed a very significant part on his growth scan, which showed that his abdominal was small, which meant his nourishment wasn't getting to him as fast as it should do.
Okay.
And she missed that completely, and that is what led to him passing away.
And if that had been picked up at the time, would there have been anything they could have done?
Yeah, they would have put me on aspirin. They would have monitored me very closely. And I know this now because the following year, almost to the exact same date, I was pregnant with my second son. And exact same thing happened then, and he was monitored so closely.
Yeah.
And he made it here safely.
Oh my goodness me. So how do you come to terms with this?
You don't. We've never had an apology. We've never had an acknowledgement of their errors. Never had an apology for them losing him for 9 hours.
So was there an investigation of any type?
No, we did take it to a solicitor, and said that there's medical negligence here. We know it's medical. And she said, yes, that is medical negligence as far as I'm concerned. So she pursued it. And she said the independent midwife agreed, yes, there was medical negligence. The independent obstetrician, who is the highest in the ranking of them, said, yes, but it doesn't guarantee that he would have been here. So he threw the case out.
That's not really an answer,
No.
Sharon, is it?
No. So he threw the case out. And it couldn't go on any further, otherwise we would have had to pay for it, and we didn't have the money to pay for it to go any further and continue to pursue for it. And so we had to drop it.
Okay.
We had to drop it. But we know ourselves from obviously what they said in the legal battle, but then also what happened with our son the following year. Yeah. We know Luca would have been here if it had all been picked up properly.
Yeah. And was the grief experience with your son, your second son, okay?
We decided, I'm Christian, and I decided to leave it in God's hands. And I said, I prayed at the Vatican, actually. We went on a trip. My mum and dad paid for us to go have a different change of scenery, get away. And we decided to go to Rome. And with Luca being an Italian name, we were seeing Luca everywhere. It was like he was on the holiday with us. And I prayed at the Vatican and said, leave it in your hands, God. If I'm meant to have a child again before Luca's first anniversary, then you'll make it happen. But if not, again, then that's in your hands. So I fell pregnant around the same time I conceived Luca. And then once we did get his due date, they were actually 6 days apart. So everything felt like deja vu, all the scan dates, all the, measurements and everything all felt so like reliving the whole thing. But the pregnancy felt like 10 years.
And I presume you were going to the same clinics and hospitals.
Yeah.
So that must have been very difficult for you.
Yes. Yeah. At one of the scan appointments, we saw the midwife who didn't pick up his growth scan, and I wanted to say something to her, and my husband held me back.
Had she made the connection or not?
No. And that was really hard.
Yeah.
That was really hard. And I said to my husband, if we get her, I will kick off in front of everyone.
Yeah.
And the fact that she was still there, even though this legal case was going on, whilst I was still expecting my second son, Kai, and she was still there working, was hard to see.
Yeah. So how long after Luca's death did you start the foundation and get the idea for taking that forward?
It was actually 6 years later.
Yeah.
So we had Kai. He really helped me with my grief. He doesn't replace Luca in any way at all, but he resembles his brother, looks like him. So I fell straight into loving motherhood.
Yes.
And being with him and cherishing it every moment. And then eventually, when he was 18 months old, I went back to work. And I felt like I was living life to the fullest potential I could without Luca here. So I was being a full-time mom. I loved my job. I was doing everything. And it felt really good. It actually helped my depression as well.
Yeah.
And but then on my way to work in 2016, so 4 years after Luca had passed away, I had a car accident. Somebody went into the back of me, and because of the way it jolted me, it caused a lot of whiplash, and what we thought was whiplash continuing for a couple of months and not going, which was strange. I had further investigations and I had a lot of brain fog. I started getting pain in other areas of my body. I was getting deep into depression, and then eventually signed off from work, and then went to a private clinic because I had health insurance through work, and found out that I was actually diagnosed with fibromyalgia.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So it had triggered fibromyalgia within my body, and the rheumatologist said, you're like a fragile vase, because you'd gone through so much trauma already in your life that another knock on that vase was going to break you. And that's what's happened. This car accident's basically broken your internal vase, and that triggered fibromyalgia, which led to me losing my career. We lost 60% of our household income overnight. I was the breadwinner, and all of a sudden all of that had gone.
Yeah.
And Kai at this point was 3.5, and he couldn't understand why Mommy can't suddenly just pick me up. And I if I was having cuddles with him, I'd write, let me sit down on the sofa, then you come into my lap and I'll cuddle you.
Yeah.
And he couldn't understand all of that, but bless him, it was really life-changing for all of us. I couldn't move properly, I couldn't walk properly. It was really hard, but that losing my career, and then on Luca's 6th anniversary, I had a breakdown.
Yeah.
And it was everything all in one go, I just suddenly lost my career. I was in chronic pain. It was his anniversary. And I broke down just like I had the news that he had died again.
Yeah. Well, losing your career is a type of bereavement. Losing your health is another type of bereavement.
Yeah.
So it's grief on top of grief on top of grief.
Yeah.
And you can only take so much. So then you had this breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in bed for about a week.
Yeah.
Only really getting up for Kyan to take him to nursery, and then back to bed, and then pick him up from nursery, and then wait for my husband to come back and take over with him while I go back to bed. So it was just doing that. And but out the other side of it, when I came out that breakdown, it became a breakthrough, because I was suddenly talking about it with my friends, and they were like, you know what, you're talking about Luca without crying. for the first time in 6 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah. And I said, it was always that moment that stuck with me, that not having enough time with him, that had always remained with me. And during this time, we'd learnt that cuddle cots were around, and, you know, realised that actually that would have been something that would have been really helpful for us.
Were they around at the time that Luca died? Was this a new invention?
It was a new invention at that time, so they hadn't come into maternity units at that point. So it actually just come out, I think, probably the same year. And so I just decided that I want to make sure everyone gets a cuddle cot, because look at me 6 years on, still also feeling that traumatic loss of time with him, and what that's done effectively on my health, on my mental health, on our lives, really, what that's turned into. So that's when I realised that I wanted to make sure everyone always had access to a cuddle cot in these tragic circumstances. So I spoke to the manufacturers and said, "What can you tell me what happens with cuddle cots? I've heard some are in cupboards because they're not working." And they said, "Oh, the NHS don't have funding to repair them." And I says, "Can they be repaired?" This is, yeah, depending on what it is that's not working, really. So I went through everything with them and decided actually we're going to repair cuddle cots, not just keep handing out new ones, because that's what was happening at the time. It's like, well, if we can repair them, let's work sustainably, not let them just end up in landfill. We'll get them working. So we started doing that. We became a registered charity in January 2020, just before the pandemic. We had so much lined up for fundraising, which had to all be cancelled. But with the support that we had already built up, we did some online bingo, etc. And we managed to repair all the cuddle cots within the Coventry and Warwickshire area.
That's amazing.
In that time. So we managed to do some work during the pandemic, but it really flourished after, I suppose, in the last sort of 20 months, is when people realise what cuddle cots are, what they do for family, how vital they actually are. The government don't deem them as vital equipment because it's not keeping a child alive. They don't see the benefits of it, when actually those parents that do have it absolutely see the benefits of it, because it helps them start their grieving process. It helps them with their mental health. It helps them make memories with their child that they're never going to see again, but they're going to hold on to those memories and cherish those for the rest of their lives. So it really is vital for that. And lots of people do see that now. So we've had lots of people that have had use of a cuddle cot who've come up to me personally at, baby loss awareness service and things to say, thank you, because of you we had 5 days with our child, because of you we had 2 extra days, and all these different things, or because of you we were able to take our baby home. So and it's really warming to hear that.
It's a beautiful way to honour the memory of Luca. But do you find that it helps you in your grief as well?
It does, yeah. I think channeling my grief through the charity work has helped me enormously with my mental health. I think I'd be in a very dark place if I hadn't started the charity, to be honest, with all the health issues as well.
Absolutely. I think it's incredible what you've done. But you also have 2 books, Angel Warrior, which is all about your story, and Why Did Grandad Die, which is an illustrated children's book about coping with a relative's death. Did you ever imagine that you would write 2 books?
No, I didn't, no. Why Did Grandad Die was actually inspired by Kai. So when he was 4, he started reception at primary school, and that week they were asked about who's at home, pets, parents, siblings. And he's always grown up knowing that he's got a brother in the sky as a star. So all through nursery, he would talk about Luca. And then suddenly he's in primary school. It's a different environment. And he said the same thing. I've got a brother, he's a star in the sky. But the children laughed. And naturally, obviously, they don't understand that thing. But the teachers didn't handle it well, even though I had warned them that he will talk about his brother who's a star in the sky and given them that information. They didn't explain it on his part to the other children. So for him, it felt like, why are they laughing at me? I've always talked about my brother.
Yeah.
So he came home quite sad, and I said, what's the matter? And he told me, and I had to explain to him that children don't really understand the same way you do because they've not had to go through the same thing, and they haven't got a brother or sister in the sky. Theirs are here. So, really awful having to explain that. He'd gone through that whole day feeling upset. But it was then 3 months later, which I realised it had obviously been playing on his mind all this time. It was during the Christmas holidays. He said to me, Mummy, how did Luca die? And that's when I had the whole conversation, that heart stopped. And that's when he became a star in the sky, when his heart stopped. And then I've got pictures of my dog around the house as well, who I had before the boys. And he said, well, did Kane's heart stop as well? I was like, yeah. I said, they're in the sky together, actually. They probably play together. And he was like, oh, really? So it's all really all these kind of explaining that actually they've gone from here, but they're together up there. And I, had this conversation, and I thought that was it. And then we were watching a movie called A Dog's Way Home. And in the movie, the homeless man who had the dog at the time wasn't waking up. He'd passed away in the cold, and the dog's trying to wake him up. And Kai said to me, Mummy, why is he not waking up to look after the doggy? I says, I think he's died, and in the cold. And he says, well, why is his body still there?
Oh.
And I was like, okay, yeah, right. So I had to explain, actually, there's a spirit that lives inside us. It's our soul that's invisible, that goes out of our body.
Yeah.
And the body is like clothes for our soul, which then goes up to the sky and becomes a star. And it just made me realise that this is how children think.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if this is how they think, I had to explain about the funeral, how you say goodbye to a body, etc. I thought there's no books around that explain this. And I've never heard of anybody having a conversation with a child. So I put it on my social media that I've had this conversation with Kai, and it's been really difficult. And so many comments came back to me to say, you know what, I don't know how you've done it, because I wouldn't know where to begin.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of really the catalyst of, actually, this needs to be in a book. It needs,
definitely.
families, children, teachers all need access to this book, because it made me think, actually, if that book had been in the school when Kai had said that about his brother in reception, his teachers could have pulled that book out and said, actually, let's address what Kai's just said and go through this book, and so explain why Kai's brother is in the sky. And I thought, well, that's what I need to do. So I had a friend who's an illustrator. We got funding together, some business sponsorships, and we basically did the book for the charity. So it brings in income for the charity.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And did you find writing the books cathartic as well?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Difficult. I think the children's book was easier to write. We had to change it a little bit to why did Grandad die, as opposed to why did Luca die, because most children will experience a great grandparent or grandparent passing away.
Yeah, it's a natural order of
in
things,
a natural
isn't
order.
It? Yeah.
If they're lucky enough to go in the natural order of things.
Yeah.
As nature was meant to have it. So that's why we made it a pet in there as well as a grandparent. We did that. So we changed that slightly. But that was quite a fun project to see how the pictures would come together and create that story in illustration. But my book, Angel Warrior, it was hard to relive a lot of what happened and put all that into the book. But it also made me realise that people need just a tips section. So at the end of every chapter, I've got like a summary of tips of how to support somebody who's grieving, or if you're the person grieving, things that you could do as well.
Yeah, sounds amazing. So how can people get in touch with you, Sharon?
So they can get in touch with me through the Luca Foundation, which is www.thelucafoundation, Luca foundation.org.uk. So it's all one word.
Yeah.
And there's a part in there where they can send me a message and I will respond to those.
Fab.
And they can also buy our children's book from there. We've also brought out a range of gifts where you can give to a person that's grieving rather than take flowers. Take them a wellbeing box.
Yeah. I've had a look on your beautiful website, and there's videos on there, and you share your story and your events, and you have a lovely online shop where you sell your books, and you have some beautiful, thoughtful bereavement gifts too. I mean, I highly recommend the listeners check it out. But what helped you to move through your grief in the early days?
In the early days, I think the focus on prayer had helped. Initially, I felt like, oh, why has God done this to me? I was starting to lose my faith. And then eventually I'd read a Bible that I'd bought to read during maternity leave. And in there it said that it's not God that does this to you. It's actually Satan who's testing his loyal followers, and God has to put you to the test to prove Satan wrong, and he doesn't want to do it, but he's got to do it. And when I read that, it made me feel stronger.
Okay.
Thinking that, okay, it's not God's fault. This has happened. This is a test. This is a test of my faith. And what can I do? So my faith actually got stronger, if anything, and that helped me through. But when I go back to the Bible, that same Bible, and it was literally within the first page or two that I saw that it's not there anymore.
How interesting.
It's just not there.
So how do you explain that?
It was what I was meant to read at the time, because something was pulling me to pick up that Bible, to understand why this had happened to me. I then obviously had Kai, and a lot of people got these sort of started coming out with comments. Oh, Kai's here now; he's replaced Luca, or Luca's come back through Kai. And I was like, no, I didn't believe any of that. And I have a great aunt who can speak in tongues, very connected with the Holy Spirit. And I prayed. I remember it's a Saturday night. I prayed, and Kai was probably about 6 months by this point. And I prayed, and I said to God, I need a message from you. Have you sent Luca back through Kai, or is Luca with you? And I just prayed on it. A few days later, I got a call from my great aunt. She says, I was praying and I got this message for you. I don't know why I've got it. Maybe you can make sense of it. And I says, what's the message? And she says, the message is that that Luca is with God and he's one of his special angels. And Kai is Kai. And she says, do you know what that's about? And I says, yes. I said, I prayed on that a couple of days ago. And then she got the message for me. So my faith has got me through hugely.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. That's really good to hear. Now, I appreciate that going through your grief after losing Luca is not a path you would have chosen. But do you feel that your grief experience has given you any gifts?
It's made me realise actually the lack of empathy that is around the subject of grief. Yeah. Hence why we came out with the Endless Love range of gifts on our website, because it's extremely hard. I designed a teddy bear which has an opening at the back and a sustainable tub, so you can put ashes of a loved one in there, or lock of hair, or anything, hospital bands, etc., that you want to keep safe. Put it in there and hug it, so you've got that person.
Oh, what a lovely thing to have. I've not heard of that before.
So yeah, it's a bit of the first charity to ever design anything like that, and I wanted to be very unique and different in the sense of something. I've based everything based on what I would have liked at the time. So, and that's what we've done. So it's given me the feeling of changing the narrative of how we speak about grief, not just with children, obviously through the children's book, but as adults, and how we support each other and have those important conversations with children, so they don't grow up with the same taboo sticking around with them, that it now becomes a normal conversation, and anybody can feel that they could talk to anybody about their grief rather than making somebody feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I feel, I'm hoping that my podcast and my books will also sort of break down that stigma, because I feel like society needs to become more grief literate.
Yes.
And people need to hear these conversations, and we need to talk about grief, don't we? We need to normalise it.
Yes.
But you're a very busy lady. You also hold a series of fundraising events throughout the year, including a ball. Do you feel that grief has changed you?
Yeah, it has. It's given me more determination in areas that I would never have done anything about in the past, had this experience not happened.
Yeah.
So I think Luca's a gift in the sense that he's helping me change things within society that should changed a long time ago, and I've started to put my voice to that. Very similar to yourself with this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that we go through a type of transformation. You know, we're still the same person, but it feels like we've been upgraded. And I think it's important that we allow ourselves to transform through the grief process. We can't be that same person after a significant loss, and it does change us. And I think sometimes people get stuck in their grief when they resist that change.
Yes.
They may feel they need to stay the same in order to love and honour their loved one. But in fact, when you move forward within that transformation and you carry that love you have for them with you, it's the best way to honour them, isn't it? So just allow yourself to move through it as fast or as slow as you need to go, and just allow the grief to change you.
Yes, exactly. I don't suppress your emotions.
No.
Let them come out freely. Don't be afraid to cry.
Yeah.
If that's a private cry or with a friend on their shoulder,
Yeah.
Still allow that time to cry even years later, because it doesn't leave you.
No.
Grief doesn't have a time stamp on it. It'll come in waves sometimes when you least expect it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think the important thing is people embrace that.
Yeah.
And people stop feeling that uncomfortableness where, they feel like, oh, I don't know what to do, or I don't know what to say. I think in any situation with grief, if you don't know what to say, simply say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. Those simple words can change how that person is feeling, just to know that you're there.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to say anything, but you're there for them, and that can be the biggest difference.
It does, because it opens that space up for the griever to be whatever they need to be.
Yeah.
But if there's awkwardness and clumsiness, it makes the griever, I can't do this now.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah, totally with you on that.
Yeah.
Did you find people were unsure how to be around you and not know what to say after Luca died?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, there was a few friends of my husband and of my own as well that were having babies, or had babies, around the same year of us losing Luca, and many just ignored us, didn't get in contact or anything, didn't announce the birth of their child to us like they would have normally.
Yeah.
So we realised who was there for us, and who wasn't really. And I think that's where you see the true side of who's got you and who hasn't. But I think ultimately, it's like one of our friends did say, you know, they'd had twins a few months beforehand. We're very close with them even now. And him and his wife came, and they literally said, we don't know what to say.
Yeah.
But we wanted to come and see you and give you a hug and just
Yeah.
let you know that we're here. And that meant more to us.
That's so lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting, though, how some people who you think will step up disappear and go off the radar?
Yeah.
And the people you don't expect, and people that surprise you, that do the loveliest things.
Yeah.
But some people just can't cope.
No.
They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, and it's easier just to ignore it and just go off the radar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, it's very interesting.
But then we'd get cards and messages from people that we didn't expect to receive anything from as well, and that was really lovely. But then when we did have Kai, we had probably more people coming forward to see him and sending gifts, and because of what they'd seen us go through. And when one of our friends, they were actually going on holiday the day Kai was born, and they got news of him being born at the airport, and he cried.
Yeah.
And which was lovely. He didn't cry when his own son was born, but he cried when Kai was born. And I think when you hear that and you see that, you realise just how much people have been affected by your loss.
Yeah, it's so touching,
and care
isn't it?
about you so much, that when your joy has come, your rainbow has come, they feel it intensely as well.
Yeah. So how would you describe grief to someone who has never had a significant loss?
It's the darkest, heaviest, most internal, painful feeling that you could never imagine.
Yeah.
You can never really understand how heavy grief is until you experience it. And I know it's noticed now when I listen to podcasts or books or anything, when people talk about heartbreak, they were heartbroken when somebody split up with them and things. And I think actually, no, heartbreak is when you've lost your child, you've lost that faithful partner that's been with you your whole life. That's heartbreak, not being in a relationship for 2 years and then they've decided not to be with you. That's not real heartbreak. And I know the difference now.
Yeah.
And that's because it's so raw, it's so painful. You feel like you can't breathe. You feel like all your internal organs are hurting because of this pain.
Yeah.
It's like having flu without the flu cold, like without the cold. It's like your whole body is hurting, and you can't get out of bed. You can't be motivated to eat. You can't be motivated to do anything.
Yeah.
It is literally that hard.
And it will always be sad.
Yeah.
There's no cure for it, is there?
No.
It will always be sad
Yeah.
that a child has died.
Mm-hmm.
But what words do you choose to use to express your condolences to other people?
I a lot of times I'll now say, if somebody's lost somebody, I know exactly how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And I'll always say time. There's no time limit. Grieve, cry,
Yeah.
scream, shout, do everything that you feel you want to. Don't suppress any of those feelings, is what I'll tell people now.
So, Sharon, apart from your own books, can you recommend any other books or films or podcasts or groups to support people?
There's a really wonderful book by a gentleman called Mo Gawdat, Gawdat.
I listened to his podcast.
Oh, do you?
He's amazing.
He's great. I've met him as well, and
Have
he's
you?
wonderful. But his book, Soul for Happy, in memory of the work he now does in memory of his son.
Yes.
is a great book to understand what happiness is and how to find happiness.
He has a great mindset, doesn't he?
He is,
When you think of his story, his son died tragically in having a routine operation, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
Was he a teenager? 21. And, you know, he's just come through, and he's such an inspiring person, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's really helped me. His podcast has been amazing.
Yeah, he's a wonderful, wonderful person. He gives them the most warmest, wonderful hugs.
Yeah.
And so, I listen to him a lot because I learn from him as well. And we have a lot in common. In fact, Stephen Bartlett's manager said to me when he met me, he said, "You remind me of Mo Gawdat."
Ah, yes, yeah. It's interesting. One of my clients said that to me after she'd been listening to my podcast. And I also listened to Stephen Bartlett's podcast, Diary of a CEO.
Yes.
Because he interviews some really interesting people, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's how I found out about Mo, actually, through Stephen, because he interviewed him.
Ah, I listened to Mo before I found Stephen's podcast. It was the other way around for me. Yeah. But I found podcasts in the early days really helped me, particularly grief-themed podcasts, because I felt I needed to connect with people that were further down the line than me. So I could see that I am going to feel better. There is, it gave me hope that if these people can get to this place, I can get to this place too.
Yes.
So I listened to a lot of podcasts in the early days and still do now.
Yeah.
So do you have any words of wisdom that you could share with our listeners to maybe help them loosen their grief in some way?
I'd say think of your loved one as that star in the sky.
Yeah.
Who does look down on you. Do you want them to see you getting on with life, living your life, but still remembering them? And I think a wonderful way of remembering them is what we started doing as soon as Luca passed away, even from the first Christmas, was we buy gifts to each other from him.
Oh, that's lovely.
So Kai was always had a present on his birthday and Christmas from his big brother.
Yeah.
Mother's Day and Father's Day, we always get a gift to each other from Luca. And we keep him alive in what we do as a family.
Yeah.
We recognise his birthday every year. We'll cut a cake and blow a candle and send a sustainable balloon up into the air.
Okay.
For, we kiss it and we send it up into the sky. And we do all these little things that keep him included in the family, our family dynamic.
Yeah.
And that's really helped us. And I think if you can take nuggets of little things that can help you, whether you plant a tree or something in the garden, you talk to that tree as though you're talking to your loved one. Have our teddy bear, for example, and put something of them in there, talk to the teddy bear, hold the teddy bear, feel like you've got them in your arms.
Yeah.
All these little things can really help that grieving process.
That's really good advice, because although they're not physically with us, they're still part of our lives. And we need to talk about them and mention their name and do anything that brings us comfort. So, yes. So I love how you've incorporated Luca's name into your family name too, and how you honour him every day and remember him through the work that you do and the rituals you have and the present buy-in. This is going to really hopefully help our listeners.
I hope so.
But what would you like people to learn from your experience?
I think I'm very passionate about new parents, expecting parents to ask more questions. There's been a rise in baby loss since the pandemic.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And by almost 4%.
Okay.
And for many reasons. Unfortunately, 80% of them are actually preventable. And it's all because the staff are overwhelmed with their workload.
Yeah.
Things get missed. And we can, as parents, ask more questions. We're just not taught to. We're just expected to take it for granted what the professionals tell us, and we're not taught how to read these charts, what to look for. Again, we just wait for that. Yes, everything's fine, and go on our way. I think what I've learned from my experience is to not just for midwives to take extra care, but as parents we can ask more about, like, explain that chart to me. What does that actually mean? Can you what's the growth scan? All these different things that I need to see. What does that mean? What's the blood flow like of my child? How much is the blood flow? There's a Doppler test that they can do to check your blood flow to the child. It's not done routinely, and yet it takes 30 seconds to do.
Yeah, we put a lot of trust, don't we, in the experts, and we just put our bodies in their hands, and we're not, like you say, we're not taught to ask questions and be inquisitive. So yeah, I think that's really good advice. Now, this is a question I like to ask all my guests, and I know that you're a Christian. What are your thoughts about the afterlife?
Very much heaven. Yeah, very much heaven. As I illustrate it in the book, that the afterlife is everyone coming together.
Yeah.
That has passed and living in a beautiful sunny meadow, no hay fever. And it's just beautifully warm and sunny all the time, and so happy. And they're all together, they look down on us, but they're all really happy in their best version of their life, in their healthiest part of their life. My book actually went to Kensington Palace, and when Her Majesty the Queen died, there was a little snippet that was on the news of what Prince Louis had said, and he said, she's gone into the sky to be with the rest of the family. And that's what's at the end of our book. So it was lovely to get a letter from them to say, thank you for the book, and that obviously had been used when Prince Philip died, and then when Her Majesty the Queen died, and to hear that on the news,
that's
straight
amazing,
away,
Sharon,
and I was like, that's come from our book, and that's amazing. So for them to, I believe he was 4 last year when the Queen died.
Right.
So he was that same age as Kai when he talked about it. So for him to have the understanding, to know she's gone to a happy place, and to know probably his own grandmother Diana is also in that happy place. I think that's really important as well. So to take that uncomfortable feeling, that, like I said, break that taboo that we've all grown up with, that loss is a taboo subject. You don't talk about loss. Let's make it a normal conversation. If children can do that and say the loveliest innocent things, then let's embrace that as adults as well, and change that going forward. Yeah,
we need to be prepared for the questions that come from children, don't we? Because they're so innocent, and they'll just ask the most awkward questions, and if we're not educated and we don't know how to have these conversations, how can we help them? But your books are going to be a massive help in that area. But do you believe our loved ones can give us signs?
Yes,
indeed. Have you had any signs?
I have one very vivid one. We have a black tiled kitchen floor. And a few years back, I'd gone in and out of the kitchen a few times. It's all been cleaned, and it was that cleaning day, there was no windows open. And then in the evening, there was this fluffy white feather in the middle of the black floor. And I'd only just been in there, and it was just there. And I felt like this was Luca giving me a sign. So I put it next to my bed that night, on my bedside table, and I had the most vivid dream of Luca and Kai playing together.
Oh wow.
And actually seeing my boys together, and I can see it now when I talk about it.
Yeah.
And people were saying to me in the dream, "Are they twins?" I was like, "No, they're a year apart."
Oh.
And it was just the most beautiful dream that I had. And I've never had anything since like that.
Yeah.
And I believe it was because of that feather.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful experience. Now, if you could give Luca a message now, what would you say?
I'd tell him how much I miss him,
Yeah.
how much I love him, and tell him that all the work that I'm doing is because of him. So he's not had a life here to live, but I'll make sure that he is living through the work that I do. So when one day, God willing, I do meet with him, I'll say, "Look at all the memories that I've made for you. You couldn't make them yourself, but I made them for you in your name."
So much good has come out of what was a really horrible experience for you, Sharon. But thank you so much for being my guest today. You are incredible. How you have managed to move forward after such a tragic loss, and now you're helping others going through a similar journey. Other parents will be gifted extra time with their babies because of the work you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much too.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Gift for Grief. Please feel free to share it with your friends and family, and let's encourage others to become more grief literate. If you're struggling with your grief or worried about your mental health, please do speak to your doctor. If you would like to join me on my social media groups, check out the show notes for all the links, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. The music on this podcast was written and recorded by Matthew Bates and can be found on his 2 albums, Fight Back and Kaleidoscope.